She entered history without noise. There were no battle cries echoing behind her footsteps, no banners raised in her name, no cities taken by force to announce her arrival. History did not carve her name with the edge of a sword. And yet, a single decision in her life quietly altered the balance between two fading and rising civilizations. She came from the Byzantine world, a civilization weighed down by centuries of power and now standing at the edge of collapse. Crossing boundaries of faith, lineage, and empire, she became the wife of Orhan Bey. From that moment onward, her life became intertwined with the fate of a rising state, and it is here that the central question emerges. Who was Asporca Hatun truly, and why does history remember her presence while refusing to fully explain her story? At the dawn of the 14th century, Anatolia stood at a crossroads of uncertainty and transformation. Old powers were weakening, their authority eroded by internal decay and endless conflict. The Byzantine Empire, once the unchallenged ruler of the Eastern Mediterranean, was unraveling from within. Political factions fought among themselves, economic systems failed, and imperial control over distant provinces slipped away. Cities that had once been firmly under Byzantine rule now stood vulnerable, contested, and exposed. The empire still carried the weight of its glorious past, but that weight had become a burden it could no longer sustain. The Seljuk order, which had once dominated much of Anatolia, had already fallen into fragmentation and memory. Their authority had dissolved, leaving behind a political vacuum across the frontier regions. Into this vacuum stepped new powers, small, determined, and ambitious. Among them were the Ottomans. At first, they were no more than a frontier community, a tribal force surviving on raids and local alliances. But by the early 1300s, something had changed. The Ottomans were no longer merely a tribe. They were becoming a state. Their leaders understood something crucial. Survival would not come from warfare alone. The sword could conquer land, but it could not hold it indefinitely. Stability required legitimacy. Legitimacy required diplomacy, and diplomacy often required marriage. The Ottomans were beginning to weave a political strategy that relied not only on military expansion, but on integration, negotiation, and religious transition. It was a strategy that would allow them to absorb territories without destroying the social fabric that held them together. It was within this fragile and shifting political world that a young Byzantine woman entered the stage of history. Her name, recorded in Ottoman sources, was Asporca Hatun. Unlike many women of early Ottoman history whose stories dissolved into legend or were erased entirely, Asporca Hatun was a historically attested figure. She was not the product of myth or poetic imagination. She existed, and her presence left traces that time could not fully erase. Ottoman records confirm that Asporca Hatun was of Byzantine Christian origin, while her exact birthplace remains unknown, and her father's name was never preserved in surviving documents. Her social standing is unmistakable. She was not a slave taken in war. She was not a captive seized during a raid. She was not a woman forced into obscurity. Asporca Hatun was almost certainly from a noble or aristocratic Byzantine family. Her marriage was deliberate, calculated, and political in nature. She entered Orhan Bey's life at a moment when relations between the Ottomans and Byzantines were shifting dramatically. The era of constant open warfare was slowly giving way to negotiation and strategic compromise. Borders were no longer defined solely by violence, but by alliances and agreements. In this environment, Asporca Hatun became more than a bride. She became a symbol. Her marriage to Orhan Bey, the second ruler of the Ottoman dynasty, carried significance far beyond personal union. Orhan Bey was the man who transformed his father's frontier beylik into a structured and expanding political entity. Under his leadership, the Ottomans captured key cities, established administrative systems, and began to think in terms of governance rather than survival. His marriage to a Byzantine noblewoman sent a powerful and deliberate message to both Christian and Muslim populations alike. The message was clear. The Ottomans were no longer outsiders. They were no longer temporary invaders. They were settling into the land, inheriting it, and reshaping it. By marrying a woman from the Byzantine elite, Orhan Bey signaled continuity rather than destruction. The old world was not being erased, it was being absorbed. This alliance softened resistance among local Christian populations. It reduced hostility in key regions where Byzantine authority was weakening but still culturally influential. For many communities, Asporca Hatun represented familiarity within change. She was a bridge between what had been and what was coming. In time, Asporca Hatun converted to Islam. This transformation carried deep symbolic meaning. It was not merely a private act of faith. It reflected the shifting realities of power, identity, and belonging in Anatolia. Her conversion symbolized the gradual transition of the land itself, from Byzantine Christian rule to Muslim Ottoman governance. It was a reflection of a world in motion, and she stood at its center. Asporca Hatun was not only a wife, she was also a mother. Historical sources indicate that she gave birth to Ibrahim Bey and possibly Halil Bey, though records differ on this point. Neither of her sons would ultimately become sultan. Yet their existence mattered deeply. In early Ottoman society, producing male heirs was a cornerstone of dynastic stability. Sons reinforced legitimacy, secured lineage, and strengthened claims to authority. Within Orhan Bey's household, where multiple wives and political marriages coexisted, Asporca Hatun played a stabilizing role. Her presence contributed to balance at a time when succession politics could easily descend into chaos. Even without placing a son on the throne, her role within the dynasty carried lasting importance. What truly sets Asporca Hatun apart from many women of her era is that she left behind tangible, documented evidence of her influence. In 1323, she established a charitable foundation, known as a waqf, in the city of Iznik. This foundation supported the poor, aided travelers, and contributed to religious institutions. Such acts were not merely expressions of personal piety. They were public, legal, and political statements. Waqf deeds are among the most reliable historical sources available. They are legal documents, carefully recorded and preserved. They prove activity, status, and recognition. Through this foundation, Asporca Hatun emerges not as a silent figure hidden behind palace walls, but as an active participant in Ottoman social and religious life. She was respected. She was acknowledged. She had agency. Over the centuries, Asporca Hatun's identity became confused with that of another woman, Nilüfer Hatun. The confusion is understandable. Both women were of Byzantine origin. Both married Orhan Bey. Both converted to Islam, and both played important roles in early Ottoman history. But history draws a clear line between them. Nilüfer Hatun was the mother of Sultan Murad I, the ruler who would take the Ottomans further along the path of empire. Her legacy is tied directly to the throne. Asporca Hatun, on the other hand, was a secondary wife. Yet secondary does not mean insignificant. While Nilüfer's son ruled, Aspora's influence lived on through charity, diplomacy, and social stability. Their roles were different, but their importance was equal in shaping the foundations of the state. In modern times, Asporca Hatun has been reimagined through popular culture. In the television series Kuruluş, Orhan, she is portrayed as a Byzantine princess, played by Alina Boz. This portrayal amplifies drama and gives visual certainty to historical ambiguity. In truth, there is no definitive evidence that Asporca Hatun was an imperial princess. However, her noble background and political marriage make such a depiction symbolically accurate. The series transforms historical probability into dramatic certainty. A familiar practice in historical storytelling, Asporca Hatun represents something rare in early Ottoman history. She embodies power without conquest, influence without command, and transformation without violence. Her strength came not from armies or authority, but from her position at a moment of transition. She stood between Christian Byzantium and Muslim Anatolia, serving as a living bridge between two worlds that were otherwise locked in conflict. Her life reminds us that the Ottoman rise was not shaped solely by warriors like Orhan Bey or by battles won and cities taken. It was also shaped by women who eased conquest through legitimacy, faith, diplomacy, and continuity. These women softened the edges of power and allowed a new state to take root without tearing society apart. Asporca Hatun is not remembered for battles. She is remembered for balance. She did not rule the empire, but she helped it survive its most fragile years. And as history turns its pages forward, her story stands as a reminder that some of the most powerful forces shaping empires operate quietly, almost invisibly. Because in the end, some empires rise not by the sword, but by the bride.